fundamental journalistic problem of reporting on corruption, any corruption in the Trump era, is that Trump is so staggeringly corrupt, no one can keep up. There's this constant stream of what would be in another administration massive, days-long, possibly administration-ending scandals, day after day. It becomes impossible to put any of it in context. And then meanwhile, Trump is making these baseless and unsubstantiated corruption claims against his opponent, Joe Biden, which even if they were true, and literally none of them have been established and many have been definitively debunked, but even if they were true, would be like the 200th worst thing Trump has done. But in the case of Turkey and foreign interference, we actually have as close to what scientists would call a controlled experiment as possible. Basically, the Turkish government and President Erdogan have for years corruptly attempted to interfere in criminal prosecutions and matters inside the U.S., first with the Obama administration and then Vice President Joe Biden back in 2016. And what happened? Joe Biden shut Erdogan down publicly, basically to his face and on camera, when he pressured the administration to extradite the guy who Erdogan blamed for a coup attempt, as well as the U.S. investigation into a Turkish state-owned bank accused of funneling money to Iran.
Only a federal court can do that. Nobody else can do that. If a president were to take this into his own hands, what would happen would be he would be impeached for violating the separation of powers.
He would be impeached. It would be so profoundly lawless and corrupt to reach into a criminal case to benefit a foreign leader. No. Okay, now let's run the experiment again. This time with a variable. Instead, we have a corrupt businessman as president of the United States. And this is exactly what Erdogan did. He now took his complaints to Donald Trump. And there, guess what? He found a much more receptive audience. The remarkable details of that are laid out in this excellent piece in the New York Times today, co-authored by investigative reporter Eric Lipton. And Eric Lipton joins me now. Eric, first set up for us what it is that Erdogan wanted out of the U.S. government, both in the previous administration and in the Trump administration.
So there was this investigation that targeted the second largest state-owned bank in Turkey, and Erdogan desperately wanted this investigation shut down, not only because it was potentially a threat to that bank and the economy of Turkey because of that bank, but implicated in the same investigation were a bunch of former ministers who were close to Erdogan. And even Erdogan and his son-in-law had been mentioned as part of the potential wrongdoing in this investigation. So this was something that threatens him politically, because if he is, if he's shown to be involved, or if people close to him are shown to be involved in a corruption scandal involving billions of dollars being diverted to Iran, it could hurt his standing in Turkey. So he desperately wanted this case to go away. He kept telling Obama that. He told Joe Biden that when Joe Biden was vice president, and then he picked up with Trump as soon as Trump became president and told him repeatedly on the phone and in in-person meetings that he wanted this case to go away.
And so then what happens?
Well, what happens is actually that Trump then begins to, direct the Justice Department and the Treasury Department to look into it. And then there's follow-up interventions by the Justice Minister of Turkey and by the Finance Minister of Turkey with Mnuchin and with Attorney General Barr. And they also repeat these requests to have the case shut down. And then the Treasury Secretary presses the Attorney General to consider perhaps a more modest fine against the bank. And then the acting Attorney General Whitaker refuses to give the Southern District of New York prosecutors permission to charge the bank, even though they produced a very compelling memo as to why those charges were justified. And then Whitaker leaves and Barr comes in, and then they have more problems yet still.
Let me just stop you there, just so people are tracking this, right? So you've got a prosecution that's emanating out of the Southern District of New York. Jeffrey Berman is the U.S. attorney there. We should note that the criminal violation here is funneling money illegally to Iran to evade sanctions. So from an ideological standpoint, the president who prides himself on getting tough on Iran, this should be a policy priority, presumably, of this president, given his stated foreign policy aims. That criminal prosecution and investigation is ongoing. And what you say is, with tentacles reaching into the Trump administration, including Rudy Giuliani, who's working on this, Rex Tillerson and John Bolton noting that there's weird amounts of pro-Turkey pressure pinging around the White House all the time, that Trump administration officials are putting pressure on Berman to not do what he thinks should be done, which is prosecute this bank criminally.
Yeah, in particular, the thing that Berman was pressured on was not whether or not the charges would go ahead against the bank specifically, but whether or not they would continue criminal investigations into individuals. So there's two different types of things. There's a case against the bank, which justice was still largely prepared to go ahead if necessary. But the question was whether or not they were going to investigate these former ministers that were close to Erdogan and other people and actually file criminal charges against them. That would be perhaps the most damaging, because then we'll get really into his inner circle. And that's what Barr, at the urging of the bank, sought to have shut down, was those subsequent investigations into these people who had been who are close to Erdogan. And that's what Berman said. That's not what we do here. Individual liability is different from corporate liability, and we're going to continue to investigate the potential criminal individual liability of these people who took bribes in return for the sanctions evasion.